Everybody knows you to taste the Esse daqui não. Não, vocês podem. Se ela ficar por aqui, porque está
Mas eu acho que pega.
no YouTube, né?
Mas eu acho que pega sim.
Pega bem.
Pega bem.
So this is the one yeah. And what's the one the one that's most is this one? I watched this. Like we can no, he told us this one is this one, so if you stay because we are in YouTube. It's also Pessoal, boa tarde. Posso falar em português? Eu acho que talk in English, but my English is not very good, so I will talk in português, então, super sensado. Primeiramente, pessoal, muito obrigada por estar aqui. Eu fico muito feliz de receber a professora Sara. Ela é da Universidade de Ottawa, no Canadá, e eu fiz doutorado de sanduíche para ela, uns 2 anos atrás. Ela é uma excelente orientadora, uma excelente pesquisadora. A área de pesquisa de Sara é bem voltada para análise de decisão de critério, eu acho que muitos de vocês aqui conhecem, e ela trabalha muito com sustentabilidade. A gente trabalhou junto, que ela também trabalhava com sedes temporais na decisão de critério. Então, como eu disse, ela é uma excelente orientadora, uma excelente pesquisadora. É muito interessante, quem tiver interesse na área dela, depois dar uma conversada com ela também, quem sabe não surgem projetos aí em conjunto. Bianca já vai ficar com ela esse ano ainda, né? Vai passar lá 2 meses, por sorte não vai pegar o inverno. Se vocês forem, tenham só cuidado com o período que vocês vão, porque o inverno lá é muito doloroso. Mas, enfim, é muito bom vocês terem a oportunidade de conhecer ela. Depois ela vai fazer uma apresentação de 30 minutos. Depois a gente abre para perguntas e depois a gente trouxe aqui um bolinho, tem café, aí a gente pode conversar com ela, vocês podem conversar com ela, conhecer ela melhor. E se quiserem também aprofundar um pouco a conversa com ela, a gente fica aqui um pouquinho com vocês. So, Sarah, please.
Thank you, Betania. I assume that she presented me in a very nice and positive way. So thank you for being here. I'm very happy, honored, glad to present some of my work to you today. Please don't hesitate to interrupt me if there's anything clear, and I'll be happy to answer your questions at the end. So the talk today will be about multi-criteria decision aiding, with Betania and Hanaka, and also with Nadia a little bit. We're working on MCDA. This is our research field, and I was specifically focused on uncertainty, how we model uncertainty, how we treat uncertainty, how we deal with uncertainty. And I insist on the fact that we are in an approach of aiding, decision aiding. We're not trying to prescribe like decision models that should give you the right solution. We propose, we recommend, and the decision makers need to make the final decision. So aiding how to lead the process in a really this approach type of aiding. So the issue of uncertainty has been discussed in many other fields, but we will try to focus on how it has an impact on decision making and how we can integrate some aspects of uncertainty in order not to distort the decisions and come up with a decision that does not address the real problem at the end, right? So I'll talk about the challenges of uncertainty, some solutions which are especially as soon as we have uncertainty in any situation. So again, I will focus on the way it is approached in MCDA. Okay. So here's our outline. So I'll start with introducing the basic model of MCDA. I don't know how familiar you are with it, so briefly I'll show what are the main the components of the decision aiding MCDA decision aiding process. Then I'll talk about uncertainty, or more generally, what we mean by information imperfections, to have a more general designation for uncertainty. And then I will introduce a model, a method that I proposed many years ago. That was for my PhD. But I will need some components of this procedure to explain the model that we propose to deal with robustness concern. So addressing the robustness concern after, and then if I have time, I would like to talk to you about the temporal dimension as a specific case of uncertainty and way to deal with uncertainty. And I will discuss maybe two studies very briefly. New POM that was proposed with a colleague from University du Québec at Rimouski in Quebec, and Utah Starty that was, I mean, the major part of Betania's work actually visited me in Ottawa, and we recently got the publication afterwards, so congratulations Betania. So, some conclusions and ideas for future work at the next. I already took too much time introducing, so I'll try to be quick, but just to set the ground for the rest of the talk. We're talking about discrete multi-criteria decision aiding, so we have a problem where we need to decide on several alternatives, decision options, based on some criteria. Why we have this field of study? Because most of the time, the criteria are not going in the same direction. They are conflictual. The most beautiful car is rarely the cheapest, right? You have a decision problem. Two criteria, you can think, not sleep at night, and you come up with a decision in the morning, but more than two criteria, scratch your head, maybe you need some help, right? This is why we have multi-criteria decision making. So we start with a set of alternatives, set of criteria, and a set of alternative evaluations. So assessing each alternative on each criteria, right? And then this is kind of our decision matrix. This is how we call it, performance matrix. And then we need a way to aggregate those assessments, right? This aggregation process, so MCAP for multi-criteria aggregation procedure, requires typically some way to model the preferences of the decision maker. Of course, in classical optimization, if the car is cheaper by $1 or 1 real, if you prefer, then you should take this car. Whereas if you're super rich, most of you are in the situation, I guess, then $1 means nothing. Maybe $100 mean nothing. But if you're very close to your budget, maybe $100 can change your preferences. So this is why we need a way to model the preference. And we have different tools and parameters depending on the method that help us model the preferences. This is usually the case with criteria weights, preference or indifference thresholds, like from what point you start preferring this alternative to the other, from what point you are like not anymore indifferent to the two alternatives. So we do have also utility functions. I mean, different ways which are represented here by the set M for the parameters required to model the preferences of the decision maker. We then aggregate and then exploit. What do we mean by exploit? This actually depends on the decision problem that we have. And in the literature of MCDA, we talk about decision problematics. Is my problem to select the best alternative? Do I need to select the car that I will buy? That is a choice problem. Do I need to rank several alternatives? This is then a ranking problem. Do I need to sort my alternatives? For example, in the case of a bank that needs to sort their clients into high risk, low risk, medium risk. They don't need a ranking, right? All they need is to assign their clients into different categories. Or more recently, we have the clustering problem in MCDA. If I have time, I don't think I will, but if I have time, I will touch base on this specific problem because it allows us to link MCDA to preference learning, machine learning as well. Typically, we talk about clustering problems when we don't have enough data or information to define the different categories. For instance, if I'm a bank and I don't know how to decide this should be high risk or medium risk or low risk, how to define those categories. Maybe I should cluster my different clients and see if something appears from my data, like these would be high risk. I do this like categorization after I do the clustering. So clustering is very interesting, especially with the abundance of data and the use of artificial intelligence based also on MCD. So now, why talking about uncertainty? Why is it so important to deal with uncertainty in a proper way? Uncertainties are everywhere, and typically uncertainty in the literature of optimization was associated with probability theory. So we use information imperfection to just get away from this like association and allow ourselves more freedom in terms of modeling tools, right? Why do we have information imperfections? They are everywhere. On the level of the decision maker, because beliefs or preferences are unstable. The car that you like today might not be the car that you will like next year, with no obvious reason, right? Also, even in a given point in time, they are not easy to express or identify. You're not sure, like, which car do you like? You don't know if it's because of the color, because of, I mean, it's very common in a decision making process that you are dealing with preferences that are not clear even at a certain point in time. For the analyst, we also have some uncertainty, some information imperfections, because we might be dealing with an inappropriate representation of the problem, right? Bernard Roy, one of the tenets of MCDA, says the map is not the territory, right? So you work on the model, on the problem, but it's maybe after some simplifications, distortions, and you end up with something that is maybe close to the real problem, but it's not it. You should be aware of that, right? Errors, even if you're using very sophisticated equipment and we still use heuristics, I mean, that involves some level of error. Also, methodological choices, right? Typically, what you find is that people who are familiar with probability theory will probably process every uncertainty type using probability distributions. The ones who are crazy about fuzzy sets, they don't see anything else apart from fuzzy sets. And have these very clear tendencies in any field, and methodological choices that are equally valid can involve some uncertainty. Why? What if you have treated the problem using fuzzy sets? Or what if you have treated the problem using probability distributions? You might end up with a completely different recommendation, right? So, and finally, on the level of the environment, uncertainty is there. The nature of entities to be modeled, like aesthetics or the level of sound that it will bother the neighborhood. These are concepts that are quite vague and it's not easy to model them. And of course, the most famous source of uncertainty is future enemies. And typically, in optimization, I would think focus was on the future enemies. And again, future is not the present to come. Even if you think that your alternatives are this and this and that, maybe in 10 years, these alternatives will not be there anymore, and maybe they will be different, it will be a subset of those alternatives that you have considered in the beginning, and this can occur on different elements of your decision problem. Now, different types of uncertainties or information imperfection. So if we look at uncertainty, it can be seen as the doubt on the reliability of the knowledge, right? So maybe because of the knowledge that is provided by a relatively reliable source, or is not easily obtainable or verifiable. For example, a patient who screams that the pain is very, very strong. Can you verify that? No. Also, somebody who tells you, I think that the car that I saw was white. You don't have any way to check. Also, of course, forecasts of this sort of type of uncertainty. Imprecision. Imprecision refers to the difficulty in the precise articulation of the knowledge. For instance, it can occur on numerical data, right? For instance, measurement that you were obtained by an instrument that is not precise enough, like the scale of your doctor's office is maybe better than the scale that you have at home, right? So some imprecision is there. Flexible knowledge, like we know that the height of an adult person is between, I don't know, 1.50 meters and 2 meters in general. But you normally, when you say the height of an adult person, everybody knows more or less what it means, right? Also, the use of natural language, like a spacious apartment, a comfortable temperature. What all these things mean, right? How to model them. Another type of uncertainty refers to incompleteness. Missing data is a good example, right? It refers to the lack of knowledge or partial knowledge. Think of maybe files of patients with rubrics missing, right? They didn't fill in all the information, so you're dealing with a database with missing information. How do you deal with this? One last remark here: imprecision, incompleteness, inconsistency. Also, there's a lot to talk about inconsistency. So pieces of knowledge that are inconsistent, right? From different databases, you get knowledge about the same element, and they're not consistent. So imprecision, incompleteness, inconsistency may lead to uncertainty. Like any person who's over 18 can vote. Is it true here? Yes. Okay. Renata is around 18. If she votes, right? So imprecise information that leads to uncertainty. So we have to keep all this in mind when we approach a decision aiding situation. Of course, to deal with all these uncertainties or information imperfections, many theories, or I prefer to use the term languages, were proposed to handle these uncertainties. So, of course, the most famous and well-established theory is that of probability. But you have also fuzzy set language, a language associated with interval analysis, like those mathematics that are forward to data that are expressed as intervals, ambiguity language, and which is associated with the theory of evidence, with functions. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but just to tell you that there are many languages, and we did some work with Renata on the literature review for all the techniques to model uncertain input data of multiple decision-making problems, and that was published in 2021. So if you're interested in the subject, you may go check. Now, very, very long time ago, I was interested in the relationships between these different theories. And I won't go into details, but I will just tell you something that is useful to understand the method that I will present in a few minutes. The theory of evidence appears as a more general framework. Probability distributions and possibility theory can appear as sub-theories, if you want. Like they can be special cases of the theory of any situation that we want. So here's like more or less an attempt to provide a tentative typology for these languages. But our proposal was the following. Uncertainties are there. They can occur on the evaluations of the alternatives, and they are not necessarily at the same time. Like the car, if I'm dealing with the price of the car, if it depends on an interest rate, for instance, or exchange rate, I might consider a probability distribution. It makes sense, there's some randomness. But if I'm talking about how spacious is the car, then maybe fuzzy set can be more appropriate, right? They're more appropriate to deal with imprecision. So different types of uncertainty can be present simultaneously in the same decision situation. So first thing, should we ignore information imperfections or uncertainty and just decide that everything is deterministic? No, I don't want to deal with uncertainty, it's too complicated. Let's take information that is deterministic and I'll be happy. Okay, you end up solving a problem that has nothing to do with reality. But if we take the endeavor of modeling uncertainty and information imperfection, then what theory to use? And do we allow ourselves the freedom to choose the theory or the language that is more appropriate to the type of uncertainty that we are dealing with? So we decided to go this way and allow ourselves to use different modeling languages depending on the nature or the type of uncertainty in hand. Okay, so we propose this NCAP mix method. My God, I'm really talking too much. This is. I'll try to be fast. I like to, I don't know what the backgrounds of each of you is, so I like to spend some time on the introduction, because otherwise the model, I'm sure you're very great mathematicians here, and you will get this, right? But why are we doing all this? And I think it's worth spending some time speaking about the motivation and the interest and the relevance of doing creating those models. So NCAP mix was a multiplicative aggregation procedure created to deal with different types of imperfections in the same decision-making situation. So a general modeling framework was proposed, and it was designed to deal with a large spectrum of mixed evaluation types, including deterministic, fuzzy, probabilistic, or stochastic, possibilistic, which is a mix of fuzzy set and probability, kind of, evidential, and missing data. And then what we did is adapt the stochastic dominance concepts to the local preference relations. So when I say local, it means on the level of each criterion between all the pairs of alternatives, and then aggregate those local relations into global preference relations, meaning I know that alternative A is indifferent to B on criterion 1. It is preferred to be on criterion 2. It is, again, indifferent to be on criterion 3. So globally, what is the relationship between A and B, like considering all the criteria together? So for the local preference relation, we adapted the stochastic dominance concept. I'll show you very quickly how. And for the aggregation part, I'll show you maybe in more details because this is what I will use after to present the robustness model. And after we obtain those global preference relations, meaning preference relations between all the pairs of alternatives, I exploit them according to the decision problematic, whether I want to obtain a ranking, a sorting. I will focus here on the ranking. So, step 1, we determine the performance matrices and the relative importance of criteria. So for this method, we need, as I said, some tools to model the preferences of the decision maker, and here we introduce the criteria weights, which should be assessed in the beginning. I'm sure if you're familiar with this area, but there are a bunch of methods that allow you to do this. Then we transform all the distributions that we have that are not necessarily probability distribution. There are some transformations that allow you to do this in order to make them have the mathematical properties of the probability distribution. And then we apply the stochastic dominance concepts, right? So I'm here talking about step 2. Step 3 is about the aggregation, and step 4 is about the exploitation. I'll talk about that in a moment. But for the local preference generation, what we do is make those transformations. I won't go into those details, but we conclude to indifference if the difference between the cumulative distributions of alternative, let's say I, and alternative K is below a certain threshold, which is S. Is there a pointer here? No, maybe. So S is my indifference threshold, right? If the difference is below this threshold, I will conclude that we have indifference between the two alternatives. Then, if we don't have this difference, I will conclude with strict preference if I have first order stochastic dominance. I will conclude with a weak preference if I have second order or third order stochastic dominance. And finally, I will conclude with incomparability. We accept this relation as a preference relation if I have no dominance observed. Okay? So I end up after this step with local preference relationships between all the pairs of alternatives. Now I will look at aggregating those local preferences. How do I do this? I assume, I will kind of test. I assume that I have preference, indifference, incomparability on different criteria between the same pair of alternatives, and I assume different possibilities for the preference relationship that would represent the best the relationship between those two alternatives globally, considering all the criteria together. So let's assume it's the strict preference, right? And I will assess the distance between strict preference and all the local preferences, right? I will do the same for each preference relation I'm considering. Difference, incomparability, inverse strict preference, inverse weak preference, and incomparability. And then calculate something we call the index of divergence. So all these distances a weighted sum using the criteria weights, and I generate those index of divergence. But then how do I assess the distance between reference relations? We proposed a measure of distance that was based on previous work of Jabber and Martel and in 2012. And Martel, I have to say the word, was my supervisor. He passed away, unfortunately, but I always have a thought for him when I present my work. And Chabot was a former also PhD student of his, and we did this work together. So the measure of distance that I developed after the one from Chabot and Martel is based on an axiomatic, basically. So we know that maybe the biggest distance is between strict preference and inverse strict preference. These are like the most proposed preference relations. It is logical to consider that indifference would be equidistant from these two preference relations. And we built some axiomatic that led us to obtain this table with these different distance measures. So the distances, basically. And we call this measure of distance D, which helps us assess like the index of divergence that we will after minimize to decide about the global preference relationship. Now, the minimum might not be unique, so we use something we call the priority rules. So we assume that strict preference has priority over indifference, and indifference has priority over weak preference, because weak preference is some kind of a state of hesitation. So when you're indifferent, you're more assertive, right? And if still we end up with preference, strict preference and inverse strict preference, we use what we call the intersection rule that leads to incomparability. Come up with something that has two of those relationships we conclude. So this is the exploitation part. Sorry, still the aggregation part, and then we exploit the way we want those preference relations. So I say 5 minutes, and I haven't talked about robustness. Okay, the idea of robustness, quickly, is that in a decision situation where we have uncertainty and where we are aware that many versions of the problem are possible. So it is quite natural to think about the robustness of our recommendation to the decision maker, right? So what we did here in the model I proposed is that we thought that on the level of the evaluations we did enough to avoid any kind of like bad surprise. We took into account the uncertainties in a rather fair way, right? But however, parameters, we have the criteria rates and the thresholds of indifference. So there are many views on robustness, and the most common idea is the robustness analysis that we conduct at the end, a kind of a posterior analysis. We believe that it's too late, because if we come up with a recommendation, the robustness analysis will look into the neighborhood of the solution that we obtained. And we might have ignored maybe other versions of our problem. And it's not easy to go back to them. So our proposal is the following. We generate different plausible sets of parameters. We use MCAP mix to obtain different rankings, right? And then we obtain, we focus on some kind of a central synthesis preorder. So a solution that is not too far away from the different possible rankings, right? And then we assess the robustness of this synthesis preorder. So very quickly, this is kind of the model. So we have W and S as our parameters. We generate different plausible versions of the problem based on the evaluations and the uncertainty, and but also on the different parameters, different sets. So we end up with maybe different ranking. We generate a synthesis preorder and then calculate the distances between the synthesis preorder and the different possible rankings and assess the robustness of this synthesis preorder. So again, the index of divergence to compute the distance between the synthesis preorder O bar, sorry, and the different preorders, OTs actually. Okay, then based on some previous works, I won't go into the details. We generate this measure of distance to assess the distance between, like dt is the distance between OT, the synthesis preorder, and the different, so O bar, this is the preorder, sorry, and the different preorders OTs. And then we use like this threshold alpha to be determined interactively with the decision maker to decide whether the preorder is the synthesis preorder is robust enough. So the idea is based on this central preorder rather than focusing on one solution and trying to look in its neighborhood, right? So a quick example. So here we generated 4 rankings. So indifference here, preference here, with the dotted line with preference and comparability. And we generated, based on the calculations for the divergence index, we generated the synthesis preorder, which was the following. And then we assessed the distances between the synthesis preorder and the different rankings or preorders generated. And we can then conclude if we decide on the level alpha, if here we decide that 0.25 is our threshold, then all of these are, I mean, the synthesis preorder is robust enough, right? So this is about robustness. Maybe I don't have time to talk about the temporal dimension, or should I? Up to you. It's 150. Okay, so can I? Yes. Okay, thank you. So this work has been developed, but we have not published it, but it's work in progress. We can focus on other decision problematics. We focus here only on ranking. Okay, so the temporal dimension, quickly. Why the temporal dimension? I mean, we talked about different types of uncertainty, but depending on the information that is available, we might do different things or handle the problem in a different way. For instance, like I'll talk quickly about MUPOM, which was developed in the context of forest management, so it's really good to see an application at least. And Jutta Sarti, Tanya, maybe we'll tell you the story after I leave. I'll show you, it's a way to integrate time series data. So if they have that available, of course. So the idea of the temporal dimension is interesting because we notice, for example, in a sustainable development context, it's very important to be able to make decisions today about things that will happen in 50, 100 years, or even more. So temporal dimension is key, right? And the recent review, I think this is an information that maybe should be shared with you, but even the temporality in sustainable development in MCDA is important. Only 5% of the studies surveyed had dealt with it, so it shows like something missing, right? So MUPOM was developed to process temporal impact of decisions, and Jutta Sarti belongs to the disaggregation approach, which I wish I had time to present to you, but that integrates the time series characteristic into an MCDA decision problem. MUPOM, quickly. So we have to decide on some strategies about how to manage the forests, and we need to decide on things that will have an impact on future generations. So typically, in sustainable development, we need to take care of these three pillars: economic, social, and environmental, and of course, the long-term decision horizon. So Multicriteria is a multi-criteria, multi-period outranking method, which was proposed to process the temporal impact of decision. And as I said, it has been applied to forestry management problem. So instead of starting with a multi-criteria matrix, we started with a multi-period, multi-criteria matrix. So what we did is we generated different rankings for different periods, and again we aggregated them the same way I aggregated the rankings to create synthesis pre-order, right? Based on the distance measure and the index of temperatures. And we focused here on selecting the best compromise alternative. So it's a different procedure, but I want to present it. So just for you to see like 5 alternatives, including different ways to deal with the foam, with the forest, with how many trees we should plant, and the different alternatives and different criteria. Here we focus on only economic and environmental, and we had those evaluations, as you see, on 30 evaluations. Sorry, because it's the evaluation is for every 5 years. I think the horizon was 102, and we generated the rankings, and that was the final graph that can be exploited in, depending on what you want to do with it, right? Rank the alternatives as possible, and so on and so forth. Utah Star T, and I will maybe just show you something so aggregation, disaggregation. All I presented so far belongs to the aggregation approach. Disaggregation goes in a different way. Disaggregation starts with an example, for instance, of ranking. The decision maker is not maybe able to rank all the alternatives, because this is ultimately what he wants to do, but he's able to rank a subset of alternatives. This will be your reference set. And you will create a model, decision model, that is compatible with the rankings that he provided, right? And of course, it's based on a linear programming process, but you will end up with maybe many plausible models that fit. It's based also on the utility theory, so that you may end up with different models that are compatible with this initial ranking. So Tanya worked on some post-optimization model in a way to address the robustness of the model that we are proposing. And here I wanted to show you something that just to show the relevance of dealing with time series. Like if you look at this example where you need to decide on in which country to invest, based on the 2 criteria, raw material and product sales prices. If you look at this, so these 2 criteria have to be minimized. If you look at this matrix, obviously you would choose country 2. But then if you look at the trend, maybe country 1 has a better profile. Yes. Maybe country 1 has a better profile because the raw material is increasing, and yes, the other is something like different. So it is relevant when you look at this example to consider time series data, not just the evaluations at a certain point in time, and maybe include descriptive measures such as the average and the trend. As opposed to just, as we typically do, focus on the average, for instance, right? So that was the proposal of the method. But Tanya, as I said, can give you a very nice presentation on this, much better than mine. But I wanted just to tell you that there is another way to do robustness when it comes to disaggregation, using the disaggregation approach. Thank you for your attention. I will stop here. I talked too much, and any question is welcome. Thank you.
be very nice if you could continue.
No,
not at all. It was a very, very good presentation. Thank you very much, Sarah. And you would come back here to Rivera to finish your presentation.
It has a better idea than you giving the presentation.
Yeah. I hope you can come back. So we are open for questions, please in English. Even if I talk boring Portuguese.
You can translate for me.
Yes, okay.
Feel free, like, I can know which one.
So feel free. She helps also. She understands French if you if you are better.
If this is an option for you, I can.
Right. So question, Leonardo.
There's someone else. I talk too much
For
as
now,
well.
you can
No,
talk.
I
You
can't.
have not same disease.
Professor disease. So, first of all, thank you very much, Sarah. It was a very clear presentation. I even noted some things for my course on NCTA. It's very nice the way you introduced, so thank you so much. It's very appropriate for the audience.
I'm glad, because this is always something we don't know,
No, but
right?
it was very. I have two good questions for you. I didn't know, I haven't had not the opportunity to see your work, and they are very interesting. And for the first, for the first contribution related to robustness, so every type of uncertainty structure, method, let's say, so you try to make some conversion for probability distribution. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, you can argue with this.
No,
but I know, like, you may say, why don't you use probability distribution from the beginning, right? But I think, and this is my approach, I don't run to transform. I mean, I try to keep it minimal as I go, right? So try to use the most appropriate modeling tool and keep any needed transformation for later on. I think the more we stay close to the problem, I think the better it is. And all I do is just give those functions probably mathematical properties, so scaling, for instance, for as a membership function, or it's just something.
Because I found it very interesting also to come up with general way. I was discussing with Renata. Renata did something related to SMA and fuzzy. She was reminding. It's very interesting to see all these transformations between us. And the second question, Sarah, is related to Yukon. Please correct me if I didn't understand. You consider the evaluations in the past. You know the evaluations that you showed some evaluations.
Yes.
They are multi-period, but in the past.
No, it's on the future.
It's on the future.
Yes, I'm deciding now on projections that the forest management ministry has about the next 150 years. Yes.
Yeah,
and we use some kind of a discount factor instead of like we have the criteria weights with the aggregation of the local preference relations, but here we use a weight for each period because we're normally less certain about future evaluations.
That's exactly
Kind of
was my question. If
Yeah.
you consider something to reach the uncertainty.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. We did that.
That's a good question because we work with past time series
Yeah, that's
and
right,
they
yes.
work with future, yeah.
And it's uncertain.
It's uncertain, yes. So it's a very interesting work when we start to work. The first work I didn't met Sarah yet. And first work I saw that was with time series was that one. Yes, it's a very good book.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
More questions? Are you shy? You can also talk with Sarah now because maybe you feel more comfortable, right? So
With pleasure.
Sarah, thank you very much.
Thank you for your attention. And cakes are with
Cakes and coffee.